Hi, fourth graders. Today for social studies, we're going to continue our inquiry on how the Spanish missions impacted the environment of California, as well as the California economy. So piggybacking on what we learned the last 2 days is we know that the native people in California relied on the natural resources that were in the region. They knew which plants they needed to use for food and which ones were used for medicinal purposes, and they also would never waste anything. When the Spanish came, a lot of the native people ended up having to convert to Catholicism. They trusted the Spanish missionaries. A lot of them had to give up a lot to live on the missions and become essentially a Spanish citizen. So they were forced to speak Spanish, and they kind of had to abandon a lot of their own customs and traditions to then take on the traditions of the Spanish. So I'm going to share with you the document that we're working off of. Again, it is in your Schoology. It is called Social Studies 4.2b. So this is the same document you used on Monday and Tuesday, so you're going to continue using it today. Okay, so today we're going to be looking at a map of La Purísima, which is the mission and the buildings surrounding the mission. So just to note that, remember that the native people ended up having to compete for food because the Spanish brought over European animals that they were not used to. So like cows and sheep. They never had seen those kinds of animals in California before. And those animals were allowed to roam free, which ended up meaning that they got to eat wherever they wanted. So that created a problem with access to food and plants that the native people relied on, which ended up really being kind of a negative impact on the native people in getting the nutrients they need, and they ended up starving, a lot of them, or having to rely on the missions in order to get some sort of food supply or access to food. So we know that the Spanish essentially used the native people to be their laborers on the mission. They did a lot of the work, the cooking, the cleaning, the building, and constructing of anything on the mission. The Spanish wanted to make sure that anything at the mission was made specifically for the Spanish. They didn't really want a lot of international trading going on. So nothing with the Brits or the French. They wanted to keep everything basically to themselves. There became a point where they had to actually start marketing the things that they sold or they made on the mission. So a lot of things that were made is because they had cattle, they had hide, right? And a lot of traders that were coming in to the coast would like to trade for cow hides so they could create things with it as well. And on the California missions, they had a lot of tallow, which is animal fat. And they used the animal fat to create soaps or candles. And this ended up being a big trading item for the Spanish missions, is that the native people were making the soaps and the candles, and that ended up being something that was profitable to the Spanish. So let's look at the question. So you're going to notice a carpenter shop in this map, and that's where people can create furniture and tools that are made out of wood. And what you really need to do is you need to notice what other sorts of work do you think took place at La Purísima. So if I click on that link, of course, I'm going to get to the map. So here's the map of La Purísima. You will see the building of the mission right here. In the back of that building is where the priests stay. It's a priest dwelling. Here is the church. Over here is where it's called escort quarters. And this is specifically a place where high-ranking military people would stay. So soldiers that were like, say, of leadership. And then over here is where the native people ended up staying. So if they lived on the mission, this is where they stayed. You'll see the fountains, which we know were important in a mission because they had a lot of livestock, and livestock needed water, so the fountains were there for the cattle, for the horses, so they could freely drink whenever they needed to while on the mission. We have the rancheria right here, and the garden right here, and then here is where they kept the cattle, and they were in adobe closure. And then here's where the blacksmith and the carpenter shop is. And here you'll see the road to Santa Ynez and Santa Barbara. That's El Camino Real right there, the road that leads to all 21 missions. So looking at this map, you can kind of see, well, if they have cattle, what kind of work do you think the native people ended up having to do with the cattle? Okay. And then the blacksmith shop, what kind of work do you think they were doing there? Okay, blacksmith works with metal and steel. So what do you think they were doing there? So that's the question that I want you to answer when you go back to your document. Okay, what other sort of work do you know? And there is some clues over here to help you. And I did talk about tallow, so you can add that to your answer. Okay, so that's it for Wednesday. You just have one source to look at and tell me what kind of work you think is happening on that mission. Good luck. I'll see you tomorrow.